I kind of have prepped for today a little bit of some EDR evasion and threat analysis. So, kind of tying in what you guys have been talking about the last few live streams and kind of showing you in a demo scenario what that looks like. What does it look like when malware does try to evade your EDR or just try to spin up on those machines?
All right. Um, any like, can you kind of explain like what a typical enterprise would look like, and maybe kind of like what your demo environment looks like, so that people can kind of like get a context of what scenarios they're looking at when we show this to them?
Yeah, so what I'm going to be focusing on mainly is the endpoints and specifically Windows event logs. So we're talking like application system security, WMI, task scheduler, just trying to pinpoint where most of the time, say like a task scheduler event is created. EDR doesn't necessarily block that, but those task scheduler events could be calling out to C2 servers, right? Before the EDR even detects a script or detects something malicious happening. So that's
We're
kind of
talking
what
about
I'll be
like
showing.
almost at that like point of infection, right? This is somebody's
Correct.
opened up a piece of malware, somebody's clicked on a link, or somebody's downloaded something. This is that point of infection, that really critical piece of the kill chain where you would expect most of your defensive systems to pick up something.
Yep, exactly. And most of the time, the EDR doesn't detect it until the ransomware attempts to execute
Yeah.
or the malware attempts to execute. So it has X amount of time to sit on that machine and just be dormant until it's ready to execute. And you could have this sitting on there for, months, years. You just don't know unless you have good detection rules around it.
All right. Well, let's get into it
And
before. Oh, go ahead, Jason.
one thing I want to highlight here is that we are seeing a new definition of execute. A lot of people
I was
ask
gonna
us,
say,
well, hey, how come?
define that a little bit.
Yeah, so a lot of people ask us, like, hey, why didn't my EDR catch this? Right? Why didn't my EDR stop this activity? And I want to point out and highlight a lot of things that Noah just mentioned. Created tasks in Task Scheduler,
Mm-hmm.
worked with the WMI calls, um, performed some activity, calling out to a C2 server. Well, if the EDR thinks that all of that activity so far is still good, that
Mm-hmm.
activity is not encrypting files, that activity is doesn't have a bad hash, that activity doesn't have any sort of uh, known bad about it yet, that's where we're starting to see the new definition of, hey, my EDR didn't detect this, and so executing is sort of defined differently these days.
So since you
Um,
brought this up, there's I will only invoke CrowdStrike as a source of reference. I'm not here to opine about whether this is a correct mentality or not a correct mentality or not. But I think there was a CrowdStrike interview where somebody at CrowdStrike had actually answered this question and had also agreed that malware landing on a box is no longer the primary detectable moment in time. Is that's kind of what I think I'm hearing you say?
yeah, that's what we're seeing. It is it's like you could have malware land on a box, and to Noah's point, what just described is just like it hasn't executed yet. It's sitting there for months, weeks, whatever the time frame you want to inject in there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's potentially even just sort of doing some reconnaissance, right? It's doing some low level work,
Mm-hmm.
creating a task. It may create a task today. Tomorrow it might do something. Next week it might do something else.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is that activity that we're seeing, that and the reason why I'm spending time emphasizing this is because we have customers that reach out to us and say, "Hey, I have bought the brand name
Mm-hmm.
EDR,
Mm-hmm.
and I am really relying on this to
Mm-hmm.
cover my keister,
Mm-hmm.
to protect our back end." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And and so we have people that have just got this mentality out there, and what we're trying to dispel is you cannot hang your hat
Yeah.
or rest on your laurels just because you've bought a name brand EDR, it's a publicly traded company and there's 1,000 or 2,000 employees at it,
Yeah.
and they have X amount of revenue. All of that does not equate to good detection methodologies that are modern and today's approach.
Yeah.
So just wanted to highlight that because this is what we talk about inside BitLyft, and this is what we're building. And so not taken away from
Yeah.
Noah's like amped up and ready to go, but um, you know,
Before we turn
just
it
want
over
to
to
highlight
Noah,
that.
let's do a couple of disclosures just really fast. So first and foremost, this is absolutely not a pitch for any particular system that Noah's about to show. This is a demo environment with just some technologies to show some examples, but it's not an endorsement and it's not a pitch for any particular product. So first and foremost, let's make sure that that's squared away. Second, as you're looking at what Noah shows you, he's going to show you how to do this in particular products that are in their demo environment. Feel free to ask in chat if there are nuances, particularly with systems that you may have or scenarios that you may have, and this is your opportunity to work with Noah, almost if you will, to kind of hear what his thought processes are and how he may go about doing this from a particular type of technology. I see your question, eCurve in chat. Let me let Noah get started, and we'll push that question up, here in a little bit. But Noah, I want to turn it over to you and let you get started. So the show floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so like Neil said, this is in no direct correlation with the platform that's being shown today. Today it is just Graylog. It is a SIM platform. You take your SIM, and it's basically the same thing, right? So what I'm going to be showing today is specifically for a package that we deploy out. It's called NXLog. It's just pulling Windows Event Viewer logs. You can view these on your box. You don't need to necessarily pull those into a platform to see them, right? But the SIM does make it a little bit easier. And so a few things when it comes to like a ransomware scenario and kind of what we were dealing with a few weeks back is right, we have a C2 server downloads something, right? It downloads another script that calls out to a different C2 server. It was disabling Microsoft Defender in WMI without the know of that, right? So even the icon on the Windows box still showed Microsoft Defender running, but in the back end, it was disabled. So I'll be kind of showing around some tips and tricks to look for when it comes to those Windows logs, because those are going to be super important to detect this type of activity. So a few things I'll go through is just the raw log, what you guys can be looking for, what Windows event IDs are associated to what action. I'll also show some alerts. So if you guys do use a SIM or a platform where you can create alerts, kind of what that alert setup looks like. So that way, when anything like this does trigger or does happen in the environment, you can get notified for it. So to start stuff off, kind of a overview of the typical things we see when it comes to ransomware. One is there's always something in task scheduler created. Yeah, I've had to go through probably 3 or 4 different ransomware scenarios, and every time the indicators are check task scheduler, check data app roaming, look at WMI for very specific use cases of um, either persistence or disablement of your antivirus. So in this case, I have a couple things that I want to show. One, what it looks like to have a suspicious scheduled task created, what that looks like, some key indicators that make it look malicious, and to go ahead and disable those and remove those. As you can see here, a couple of these raw logs. So here, as an example, WMI activity is a Windows event log that is pulled through Windows Event Viewer and the associated event ID of 5857. So what does this look like when it's all parsed out from the raw log and into a platform? Some of the key things to look for is exactly just this event ID and some of the context within it. More often than not, there is a script text that is a hidden, or with this flag here, -w hidden -c. which goes out to a C2 server and starts pulling in malicious scripts. Whether that's a PS1 script, in the case where our last incident occurred, it was a .hta file, which then converted into a PowerShell script. So when it comes to this, this is what the raw log looks like outside of Windows Event Viewer. And then as an example, it's coming into WMI, making a registry change, and putting persistence on that box. Let me comb through the rest of these
Real quick.
logs.
Go back up to that PowerShell command really fast. I think it's
Yeah,
pretty safe to say too that almost any PowerShell command like this will probably be making some type of web call external to your environment as well.
correct. Yep. Yeah, and more oftentimes than not, and I will be showing this today as well, is PowerShell calling Internet Explorer as a sub process or a new process
Mm,
creation to go ahead and pull these. So when it comes to WMI, that is kind of the activity that we're looking out for. Um, when it comes to like a scheduled task, and let me just scroll through here. This is event ID 4698 inside Windows Event Viewer. The message would be a scheduled task was created, right? This can be a noisy one if there are scheduled
hmm
tasks being deployed frequently in the environment, but that's where the alert tuning comes into play. You can get pretty specific when you build out these rules for this detection. In this case, as an example, the task name that was created was Microsoft Windows Update Mimikatz-job,
mm,
just as an example. And when you break down into the task scheduler, I'm sure everyone is familiar with going into task scheduler, clicking through it, and seeing what it's trying to execute, that context. Most often than not, it is calling PowerShell once again for a hidden PowerShell script
mm,
or doing some sort of malicious activity inside that. As an example, and I believe you guys talked about it on the last stream, the other ones that we just recently had was they were hiding it under the name of like .NET Framework.
hmm
So to the naked eye inside Task Scheduler, it just looks like .NET Framework is scheduled to operate. But when you dive in deeper, it was actually calling some hidden PowerShell scripts.
What we're looking at here, this is raw data from from NX log, right? This is, you guys haven't munged this at all. This is how that data is going
Correct.
to come in. So if you're running any type of endpoint telemetry, you should be getting, this could be sysinternals, this could be Intune, this could be any type of endpoint telemetry that you happen to have in an environment to get this.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. It doesn't have to be specifically NXLog. There's various different applications out there you can use to pull in these logs from an endpoint. Another one, as an example, this one is with Mimikatz.exe calling secu secural which is a command that it uses to basically do a password dump on that machine.
So how come in this
So
case, are you saying in this case it actually ran the Mimikatz executable? This one was also evaded through EDR as well?
correct. Yep. And through this, it's because it's using CMD as a pop-up to then spawn the new process of Mimikatz. Most often than not, EDR is looking for is when it comes to ransomware and stuff like that, the scripts in place to actually execute that. Um, Even though this is a demo in our real world scenario a few weeks back, or maybe it was a month ago, is the only indicator from EDR was actually the very last executable
Mm.
being launched and blocked. So a lot of this took place through the whole process of that kill chain to execute.
So
Um,
With Mimikatz, like, so I would have presumed that EDR would have picked it up when there was some process that was attempting to hook into LSAS and dump the creds. So not even being picked up on that function call at all. It wasn't even picking up on that.
Correct.
Mm,
Correct. It was the very last system call that was actually blocked, which was the actual full payload for encryption.
mm,
So yeah,
And can
so
you
this is kind
imagine
of
that?
the
All
scenario.
of the precursor activity was not detected by a name brand EDR.
And that's like, so just to be clear, right? And again, no slant or anything to any, again, to vendors or practitioners or anything involved. The EDR was bought, the EDR was deployed. I'm sure there was some initial configuration that was either done either through BitLyft, another MSP, or potentially the EDR vendor, and it was left in a state, and that state was certified by somebody to be a known good working state, but yet all of these indicators bypassed that known good working state by multiple levels of implementation teams.
Yep.
Correct.
Yep.
So I wanted to articulate that in no uncertain terms so that everybody can understand. Like, this wasn't just like somebody swiped a credit card, downloaded an EDR, and said, "Cool, we're good to go." Typical enterprise software deployment on this is, "Hey, I'm going to buy your EDR. Cool. We're going to start an implementation project. There's a project manager, there's a sales engineer, there's an implementation engineer, there's a solution architect. There's a ton of team that come in and design, architect, deploy an EDR solution in an enterprise. And there's usually some initial tuning and configuration and initial setup that happens with that vendor. Maybe the MSP is involved, maybe the MSP is not involved. It just depends. And then at some point in time, those teams, cool, you're good. We're out." And you're saying that scenario is leaving your organizations vulnerable.
Yep.
Mm.
Yeah, and it is because, like, what Noah's highlighting here is log analysis is still extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the market, if you talk to a salesperson, the market has moved on from SIM.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's only because they got bored of selling it or something. But still, log analysis, and having logs come into a SIM and perform this, what I would call foundational function, right? Inside with analysis also at the EDR level is still 100% necessary,
Mm.
right? Because the EDR is not doing this function,
Yeah.
right? And it wasn't designed to do this function either, right? I mean, I talk about design a lot in architecture, oftentimes because you design and architected a software product to fulfill a specific feature function. But it, you can't take EDR, and you shouldn't take EDR and go try and perform SIM functions at the exact same time,
Yeah.
because it's not what it was built for. It's not what it was designed to do.
Hey, Noah, question for you from Dosco says task scheduler and WMI use of any type should be alerted on, correct? What's your kind of take on, on kind of that comment?
I think it should be of any kind logged, not necessarily alerted on. If you alert on task scheduler activity, you will have a lot of false positives, right? Task scheduler has good known things inside there that it has to use to operate, right? Um, Same with WMI. But there is key specifics inside both of those services to look out for. One for task scheduler is a new process or a new task created, and what the actual message or the context in that is. As the example that I showed, pull it back here, is the like that script that was being called out. So right. So if you had all of this alerting on anytime vendor event ID 4698 occurred, you'd have a ton of alerts.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but what to look for is if this happens, right? It's kind of a if this and this and this, then alert type of scenario.
You're talking
If that
about
makes sense.
you're talking about alert tuning at the end of the day.
Correct. Yep. And really, you just want to alert on like context within this. So maybe a wildcard inside that alert of PowerShell.exe, or maybe you're looking at specifically dash W space hidden. Like those are some other indicators to kind of narrow that down, and reduce the false positives.
how do you chase that in an effective way, Noah? Because I think that leads kind of to this question here, which is right: are the task schedules always new, or are they able to be edited, and then an old legitimate task schedule is then set to avoid detection? Like, how do you play that whack-a-mole in the most effective way? Because it seems like you could tune the alert to only include what's listed in the task content line here, but then
Mhm.
the malware developers or the ransomware operators or whatever else find a different way to maybe obscure that with like a base 64 or something else like that, and now you're tuning the alert again post attack. Like, how do you chase that rabbit?
Yeah, from my personal experience, from all the scenarios that I have had to endure, right, when it comes to stuff like that, is it's always a new task. These scripts, the initial scripts that get downloaded or the initial infection usually creates the scheduled tasks. Because that way they line up to the scripts that they're also pulling off those C2 servers.
Mm.
If they just went and edited a normal task, then they'd have to change up their scripts and all that, and they're pretty lazy, right? They just
Right,
want it to work.
right.
And it's in my experience, it's the same thing every single time. Like when it comes to jumping on with a customer to do forensics after this, I know exactly where to go because they don't really change up how they do this stuff, right? It's always a
Mm.
scheduled task. It's always WMI. It's always looking at app data roaming for those other scripts and stuff like that. So in my experience, and don't hold this to me, that it's always a new task scheduler created or
Yeah,
new task inside task scheduler.
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And I think you could think about it in two ways. One is they would have to know that it said task exists on that machine before, what its name is, and all of that. Because if they go try and edit an existing task there, they have to get it 100% right. Otherwise, their first functions will fail. The second thing is you have to throw into this equation is that they want a predictable outcome. And in order to have a predictable outcome, they need to create that new task exactly the way that they want it named and exactly when they want it to run. So I believe that that's why they're creating new tasks. And also, Noah nailed it. They're lazy, right? I mean, they want a predictable outcome. They want it to work exactly the way that they want it to work. So they're going to create a new task.
Well, and I imagine when you're dealing with, I mean, again, having been on the pen testing side, the offensive side with the NSA, whatnot, over a number of years, right? I mean, you want something that's largely repeatable against a predictable target set, and so it's hard to guess what task you would need to edit versus create new, and so it's just
Right.
easier just to write a PowerShell script or a JavaScript or something like that that'll just like do a net new scheduled task across multiple hosts whenever you go to impact. Again, accuracy by volume type mentality.
Yeah. Or a .hta file that the EDR is not looking for.
It's funny you say that because Dosco was like, any hope in wishing Microsoft would burn HTA to the ground.
No, why would they? Why would they? Please share with your thoughts of why they would even burn it to the ground.
I mean, that it goes back to the lazy thing I was talking about. These guys are lazy. Like
Yeah.
this attack, yes, it happened a couple, like I think it was last month. It's it's still tactics used from like 2022, 2023. The same exact scripts,
Yep.
the same exact task scheduler names, everything. So the write-ups are already out there. And we used those to help try to find the persistence, right?
Mm.
If somebody already has this documented with everything in it for this exact attack, why not use that to benefit, right? Um, so
How much faster is it for you to do an investigation? Let's assume that you're getting the right logs into a SIM in the first place. How much
mhm.
faster is it for you to investigate with a SIM versus if you didn't have some type of central collection point, or if you had to go to, each individual host, or if you had to go to maybe like Intune and then you had to go to the EDR separately? How important is it for the quickness of the investigation to have access to all the data in one place like you have it in a SIM?
Oh, it's a night and day difference, right? Windows event viewer logs happen all day long.
Mm,
There's a ton of them. And if you don't have central logging, it does make a pain, right? Because you got to go and click through all those Windows event viewer logs inside Windows event viewer
hmm
and try to find this stuff. Whereas central collection, you can map all the fields to a name that's suitable for what you want to look for. So in this case, as an example, I know if I look at event ID, I have this all instead of Windows event ID, or just ID. You can name it however you want,
Mm-hmm.
and that way you can look for stuff like this. So I can look for the top event IDs in this specific scenario of what occurred. It just makes for very quick filtering when you have like a central collector or a data lake. Doesn't even have to be a SIM.
Especially in the middle of an incident as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
I think about this like if and we have people tell us all the time, oh, we don't need central log collection, we don't need a SIM. And I'm like, okay, great. But if you feel that way, that's your opinion. But you are literally going to spend hours and hours and hours sifting through millions of log data, and you're going to have to make sense of it all on your own, right? And then not only that, but you're taking human time for what software has already been invented to do in minutes. And it's
Mm.
sometimes in some cases so quick that it could alert on it in seconds. This would be like, you know, are you still riding a horse to work?
Well,
Yes, you can ride a horse to work, but you probably own a car,
yeah.
right?
We may be pivoting here a little bit, and that's okay. That's what that's the nature of content. But this is a great question here from Outcast, or more like a statement or something. Noah, I don't know if your demo environment. I know you prepped some of this specifically for this stream, and I appreciate it for it. So if you don't have this, that's fine. But Outcast says not only having them all in one location, but having a solution that can correlate the logs and pull in additional context. Do you happen to have an example of a correlation rule, or something where it's been enriched with context or something that you could show chat? And it's fine if you don't. I just didn't know if you had something in your demo
Yeah,
environment.
I don't have any correlation rules in the environment, but I
Mhm.
do have like normal actual alerts and rules that I was planning to just kind of walk through.
Yeah,
They're very basic, and I can kind of show based off the logs where
yeah,
improvements can be made, just because it was quick and dirty to get it in.
yeah. Let's see those.
Cool. Real quick, I just wanted to go over
Yeah.
this one. This is for vendor message ID 4657. And this is when H key registration change is made.
Mm,
This is what we were identifying with it trying to disable Windows Defender, which it successfully did, as well as Sophos. So that was the two EDRs this specific attack was looking for to change. And so what that log looks like, again, you have to make sure this is logging. Kind of goes back into, not to be super off topic, but GPO policies,
mm-hmm.
making sure you have logging for all these Windows event IDs pushed out through GPO. Um, but for a change. And what we're looking for specifically is this new value. So if you go into your H key registration and look at the values for Windows Defender, you'll see a 0 or a 1.
Mm,
Changing it to a 1 will then disable it. And the actual GUI of Windows Defender will not know
mm.
from what we demonstrated during that last ransomware scenario.
So by changing the registry value, the UI is completely oblivious to that. But on the back end, whenever the system call is made, it's like, hey, it's actually disabled. Don't check for this.
Correct. Yep. So yeah, I
This
just want
is
to
I
show
like
that
to
real
think
quick.
of sorry, Noah, but I like to think of
Oh,
like
you're
your
good.
registry it as like the breaker box, in
Mm-hmm.
your house. It's like the wall switch
Mm-hmm.
is relatively dumb. It doesn't know
The
whether it's
wall
got
switch
power or
being the
not.
UI, any UI
The
interface
wall
for
switch being the UI.
the
Yep,
yeah.
yep. And yet, but the breaker, wherever your breaker box is in your house or where you live, that could be turned on and turned off. It's a 1 and a 0, right?
Yeah.
And I also think that it's important for you to know the difference between the 1 and the 0 inside that value, so that you can go look at it for yourself and
If
what it means.
it would, when we talk about this, and we may be getting into super nuanced versions of this as well, would Intune pick up if this was disabled, or would Intune still show it enabled because it's reading the UI, but the host itself, when it goes to execute on the host, still shows that it's disabled because the registry is disabled on the host. Like, is that broken all the way up the chain when you think about a Windows ecosystem from a monitoring perspective?
I don't know 100% for sure. Just because most of our customers don't have Intune deployed
Gotcha.
for their environment. But I would assume so, right? If the GUI doesn't display it, I don't know if Intune actually goes in and looks at H key registrations
Yeah.
and sees if the value is a zero or a one. It might. I'm just not sure on that scenario.
I was gonna say, like, I think in most environments I've set up, like, you'd have to have the Defender XDR with like the E5 or whatever the new license version is. You'd have to have that stuff dumped to ALA, and then maybe you could see it in Sentinel or something else if you really had it turned on. But I think that's like what you're describing is, since it's host based, it's not being passed all the way up the chain. I think that's where my
Yeah.
head's at, which is why I asked it.
And in most scenarios I've seen is that it sets the registry value up front,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not like it goes back and checks the registry value once every 24 hours or
Mm-hmm.
something after it's set up front. So, but that's what we've seen. The other thing is if you are pushing this stuff into Sentinel, you'd have to make sure that you are looking for these registry keys and these values in
Yeah.
Sentinel.
Yeah.
It's not something that's set up out of the box.
No. No. And
Correct.
it's actually kind of a pain in the ass to do too.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'll jump over to the alerts and kind of show what some of those look like. Again, different for every platform. But for this example, let's just stick with the registry change. As an example, your alerts. Like, what kind of context are you looking for when you build these? And over here in the additional fields section and this event keys is kind of what I'm looking for when one of the SOC analysts gets it and they can determine if this is malicious or not, right?
Mm.
So some of the fields we're looking for, object type is registry key. What user, what host name, and that value. Is it a zero or is it a one?
Mm-hmm.
In this case, that new value is a one, and that object name is, HKey LM software, Microsoft Windows Defender features disable anti-spyware. So for our team would know that, hey, this just got disabled. Windows Defender just got disabled on this endpoint.
So just real quick, just to do a compare and contrast, what you had in the other tab would be raw logs. That's what's coming in from a Sysmon or an NX log or potentially an Intune or something like that. That still has to
Correct.
be transformed in some way into an alert, either through a correlation rule or some other type of process to try to get to something that takes the noise that you're seeing across that vast amount of data and makes it a little bit easier for an analyst, to your point, to look at this and say something is wrong, we've got to action on this.
Correct. Yep. And in this case, I can go to this rule and show you what that looks like. It is a very simple rule just for today,
Mm-hmm.
but I can show you what I would change when it's an active, actual in a prod environment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in this case, the search query, it's based off of the vendor message ID. I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking for the event ID associated with the registry change.
Mm-hmm.
To make this more um, granular, would be to again include like and we'll just do and new value is a one. So now it's even more filtered. So now
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at event ID for tests for HKey registry change, and that value of that registry change is a one or disabled in this case.
For
So that
everybody
would reduce
for
some of that noise.
for everybody watching, this is alert tuning, right? It is this type of editing that you're just going through to try to your point, Noah, filter out some of the noise that this otherwise would create.
Yep, yep, exactly. Um, so that's what that looks like. Again, you could be as granular as you can, right? So if you want to even have more granularity and have it specifically filtered for that object name, you could do something like this. Do and new value on, and let's just say that
Mm-hmm.
object name.
Mm-hmm.
So this one is very specific, will only trigger now with this change when Windows Defender disabled anti-spyware is the object name, and it is changed to from a zero to a one.
But I
So now
think
this is very, very granular.
I think that there's an obvious question like, oh, well, why didn't you just do that from Jump Street? What are some natural disadvantages to being this granular when you're writing these types of alerts?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the more granular you get it, the more specific it is, and that means any other, you know, registry change that did happen is not going to be caught by this alert.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to have a wide variety of these events or alerts for when a registry change happens, I would keep it probably at, this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I'd create a new rule for registry change for Windows Defender. I'd create a brand new one and then make it more granular. That way I have both, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's kind of how I would do it.
Is there a chat's gonna love me for this, and I'm gonna throw the ROI word out there for chat, right? Is there a point of diminishing returns where you've just got so much rule, so much tuning, so much detail where it now becomes an administrative headache for you to do?
Um, it really depends. Personally, I would say no.
Mm,
Um, it's kind of like you look like at like MITRE ATT&CK framework as an example.
mm-hmm,
They have good base policies that you can map to that really doesn't need much tuning after that, right?
mm-hmm,
Um, so you can get it to a point. Yes, the initial setup kind of sucks. I remember one year we went through probably like 4 months of rule tuning
mm.
just to get initial rules created, and then it's just constant after that. So it does take time to get your base rule set right, and once that's there, then it just gets easier and less chaotic when it comes to tuning. I'm not saying that it completely goes away,
Yeah,
but it does make it easier. It's just that initial upfront kind of pain to get going.
nice. Um,
Yeah, I
all
mean,
right.
we have these conversations internally, right? So you might be sitting there thinking, I have Windows Defender. You probably should put these search queries in place and alert on them. You could probably think about like, hey, I have CrowdStrike or I have SentinelOne or I have these other ones, and you might want to create specific alarm alerts queries that help you focus in on those. Um,
They
and
might
that's
also
why
be they
it
might also
really,
be broken up by you may have a large SOC team that does phishing, and so you've got a rule group that's set up for phishing, and so all they look at is the phishing
yeah,
alerts, and then somebody for desktop, and then somebody for server or PCI infrastructure, and so you could have lower groups set up based on job function inside the SOC as well.
exactly. That's a great way to think about it, and that's why like all the alerts that we have aren't always applicable to all customers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've got to sit down and this isn't a one size fits all. It's a what do I look like? What is my size? What is the makeup of the environment? What software do we have installed and what don't we have installed?
But also, like to what you and Noah just went through with this ransomware, things are going to happen. You're going to get punched in the face, and then you have to go back to the tools that you rely on and figure out how you adapt to that.
Yes, exactly.
All right. What else you got to show for us?
Yeah, just another alert here. This one is specifically for a scheduled task was created. Again, very similar to the other one. We're looking for very key indicators that something malicious is going on.
Mm-hmm.
So the message, a scheduled task was created, username, host name, and what was that task content? In
Mm-hmm.
this case, the PowerShell .exe with a hidden flag here. Um, Very same scenario where it is in this point in time very broad, but
Mm-hmm.
then you could narrow it down with your filtering. So you could take looking for a specific PowerShell.exe inside that task content. You could add that here in like a wildcard search. You can get more granular with it as you please.
When it comes to Windows event logs, right? I think there's a multitude of Windows event logs. Like I don't want to say that there's infinite, but the Windows event logs are a rather vast trove of data that exist. Um,
Hmm.
is there again? I go back to from an attacker's perspective. the attacker's kind of banking that Windows event logging is a pain in the ass, and therefore they're not really worried that you're going to detect a lot of this stuff through Windows event logging. Is that kind of been your experience too? Is that like this is just one of those things that's a pain in the ass to manage, it's a pain in the ass to alert on, it's a pain in the ass to set up rules for from a SOC perspective, and so because it's hard for security, that's what makes it easy for attackers?
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with some of that. Again, the GPO thing, where you set it
Mm-hmm.
up in GPO to make sure that these endpoints are logging all the correct, system application and security logs. Um, Sometimes people are like, well, I see this event ID occur or this action occur, but no Windows event ID associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, okay, well, do you have this pushed out via GPO? Do you have this
Mm-hmm.
specific thing enabled so it does log? Um, and most often than not, they don't. So we help create that GPO policy to make sure logging on those endpoints is set up correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, there's a lot of work involved into this, just kind of like anything, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to security, it makes it difficult because it is a lot of work to do to get things in a spot that is proactive with this type of scenario, um, or at least as close to proactive as possible.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would recommend in this, you do review the Windows Event Viewer IDs that are known, that are documented, that you believe that you want to log and record, right? Um, Familiarize yourself with them. But as Noah just mentioned, not all of the activity that we see are correlated with an event ID. So you have to also be aware of that. Um,
And I'll
this is
just
something that,
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I'm gonna remind chat. I just hit the command for the IOCs. You can also go to the BitLyft page to get the previous write-ups with the Windows event logs, or Windows event IDs that they've seen in previous incidents as well. Just I dropped that for chat as well, so they can see that.
Yeah, and we're going to be dropping in this threat briefing into the repo as well today. But just so that folks are aware, it's like the emphasis here is on the concepts that we're showcasing, and not necessarily like Graylog or a
Yeah,
specific EDR, but these other concepts that you need to be looking out for. And as Noah's mentioning here, it's like there isn't an easy button to hit. We're, as human nature, we're always looking for the easy button to hit. But unfortunately, there's a lot of vendors that you're working with here. You're working with Microsoft, you're working with your firewall, you're working with AWS, or you're working with like Microsoft Azure, you're working with Intune, Defender. When you add it up and you think about all of the vendors that you're working with and you're trying to make sure that you're detecting activity across all of those vendors, you might come up with a list of 15, 20, 25, maybe 30 different vendors that you're looking for activity in.
yeah.
Well, that that takes some time. That takes some thought. That takes a game plan, you know.
There's a great question here from eCurve and Noah. I don't know if you or Jason want to answer this one, but kind of to your point, Jason, about different tools operating different ways in which you have to be prepared to monitor this type of stuff. Can one of you give a resource or just like a brief overview on how EDRs, and I hate the word XDR. We can avoid the fact that you said XDR. How do they work internally, and what interfaces are monitored when they're looking to catch this type of unusual malware activity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll take a stab at answering this first, Jason.
Yeah.
So it depends on the EDR vendor. Most likely than not, it's going to be signature based. As you've seen in the past, right? A lot of it is due to like memory. So a lot of these EDRs do embed themselves into memory, which is, in my opinion, a good thing and also a bad thing, as
Mm,
you can see what happens when something breaks and it's running in memory, or looking at memory, right? And it bricks all your systems. And then there is some
that
that are specifically
thou shall
looking.
not be named. That thou shall not be
Yeah,
named.
yeah, exactly. And then there are some that we have, had conversations with, we've looked at, had with customers that are more encryption based. So they use
Mm,
different algorithms they're not looking for signatures, they're
mm,
looking for when mathematically encryption happens.
mm,
So there's different varieties out there, and it's good to ask questions to your vendors on what are they doing for detection. Is it signature based? Is it
mhm.
looking at when different hashes and stuff come through that are not signed by, not signed correctly, or is it a mathematical equation that is looking for encryption or
Don't
that
a-
type of
don't
activity?
ask the salesperson. Ask an actual engineer.
Exactly. Yes. Do
Mhm.
not ask the salespeople. Ask an engineer that helps build the product, works on the product, and they'll have the best answer for you.